it's Caribbean Chris from Saltwater Smarts, and I'm back with episode number 3 of Salt Speak. Today I'm going to talk with Stu Wobbe of Coldwater Marine Aquatics, and we're going to be talking all about cold water and temperate marine systems. Now, we did have some tech problems during the chat, so we lost my video. We do, however, still have my audio, and we have Stu's audio and video as well, so we're going to roll with it. So I'll be back to touch base with you after the chat. Alright, Salties, today I'm here with Stu Wobbe of Coldwater Marine Aquatics, and we're going to talk about cold water marine systems in general, and then talk a little bit about Stu's business. So I guess right off the top, Stu, let's talk about what actually constitutes a cold water marine aquarium.
Yeah, cold water marine aquariums are kind of just a niche within the tropical marine hobby of tanks that are considerably cooler, down into the 55-60 degree range is our ideal temperature. So there's some species that span up into the subtropical range that occur within the temperate and cold water areas, but for the most part, the cold water tanks are significantly cooler by about 25-30 degrees than most tropical tanks.
Okay, so in your estimation, how many cold water hobbyists are out there right now that you know of?
That I know of, there's probably in the high hundreds, I'd say, overall worldwide. Within the U.S., most of the cold water and temperate aquarium keepers have been in contact with us to get livestock. So I can look through a lot of our past customers and get an idea of how many people are there. But this is an example of people that are interested in keeping them. Our cold water marine aquarium owners group on Facebook has about 600 members, and we're working on an interactive point map to show all those people, so that's available on there too. But yeah, I'd probably say in the high hundreds. Those are just people that we know of that are interacting with us, getting livestock, or talking with us online.
So in your hyper niche of the niche hobby of saltwater aquariums, is it growing, holding steady? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's been consistently growing year over year. When I first started into this, keeping aquariums or temperate marine aquariums for myself, I dabbled with it back in high school and kind of gave up. But I started really keeping them about 2010, 2011. And back then there was just a handful of people. Steve Wiest was an iconic cold water marine aquarium keeper, and he happened to be like 20 miles from me here in Oregon. So he helped me along the way getting my tanks originally set up. And back then it was, you'd see a lot of people talking about it in online forums, and I'd really like to keep these. A lot of the discussions about Catalina gobies turned into cold water discussions. And but for every 20 or so people that were really interested in it, you might see one of them actually do it. And that was back then. There was, like I said, maybe a handful of people worldwide, and it's exponentially grown year over year, especially with people offering all-in-one tanks. Like the guys from Untitled Aquatics that did our tanks at MACNA. Also, Micro Reefs down in California, they do an all-in-one tank now too. So between that and then the availability of chillers coming down in price, makes it a lot more available for people to get into it. And the price range is right about the same as starting a tropical tank.
Okay. Well, that's actually a good segue that you're talking about chillers, because last year when I walked into your booth at MACNA and was talking to you and Josh, my big question was, what are the main differences in equipment and maintenance that you have compared to a tropical system? So can you give us kind of a rundown on that?
Yeah, sure. As far as the hardware, it comes down to, the life support system of your tank is really the chiller. So without having a good chiller to keep everything at the correct temperature, as soon as your temps start to climb up into the upper 60s, low 70s, you get into that mid 70 range, and it's cooking everything, because the oxygen content in the water drops so rapidly when you raise the temperature. So the chillers are the major aspect. Other than that, the tanks themselves, you can't really use you could get away maybe using a glass tank in very specific scenarios, but ideally you want to use a thick acrylic tank to insulate the water volume and prevent condensation on the outside of the tank. Some people use dual pane glass tanks, which are a little more scarce. They're usually in the used lobster tank section of aquariums. But
Okay.
other than that, yeah, waste removal. A lot of people liken them to keeping a fish only with live rock tank. It's really about feeding the animals as much as they can take, because there's some animals that basically just constantly filter feed from the water, and then removing the excess waste as fast as possible. So good skimming, good mechanical filtration. Biological is always a tough one because the biological processes happen so much slower in cooler temperatures. So people have been experimenting with remote deep sand beds, algae turf scrubbers. A lot of people are using on the cold water tanks just recently. But yeah, so you could liken it to a fish only with live rock, or actually more closely maybe a non-photosynthetic tank that people keep in the subtropical and tropical range. Real similar in upkeep because the lighting requirements are pretty much nil unless you're keeping just a few of the photosynthetic anemones that occur in temperate waters, since most of the temperate waters worldwide are fairly murky. And if you've ever been to Oregon, there's not a lot of sun all year long, nowhere near the tropics.
Okay. So, how about in terms of cleaning and water changes? I know that was a big thing that surprised me when I was talking to you guys at Macna.
Yeah, with the water changes, it's, I mean, you kind of gauge it by looking at same thing you do for in tropicals, a lot of people recommend water changes monthly or doing it however, but we basically gauge it on the level of nitrates in the tank, which with no evaporation from the water, because the water is staying cooler than the room temperature, you don't get that swing in salinity. Most of the animals use very little trace elements, if at all, because there's hardly any stony corals. There's a few small stony corals, but not really reef building corals in temperate waters. So you're not losing a lot of your trace elements in your water. So water changes can be pretty spread out. Like I have a nano tank that basically I drop carbon and maybe like Phosban or Chemipure, something like that. I'd use chemical filtration and then a sponge filter on it. And I don't even run a skimmer on that one because I run macroalgae in the tank. But it goes, I think I do a water change on that every maybe 3 months, just as like I haven't done a water change in 3 months, so I'm going to do one. So,
Right.
but yeah, a lot of people that are keeping tanks, they basically just watch their nitrate levels, and they really only do water changes if the nitrates spike. So, which is pretty slim because the parameters stay so stable unless you add a really large bioload and overwhelm it.
Okay. So you touched on it a bit when you were talking about acrylic tanks, but how big of a problem is condensation? I know that's when you look at conversations online and ones that I noticed years ago, everybody was always concerned about condensation. Is it really that big of a problem?
Coming from the aspect of, I have a tropical aquarium or a reef tank, and I want to set up a cold water tank, so I'm going to grab what I got on hand and build one, add a chiller. Condensation would be a huge issue because with the glass tank, it basically insulates not at all. It's the temperature on the outside of the glass is the exact same temperature as your water. So if you're running a tank down at 55 degrees, that means the outside temperature of your tank is 55 degrees also. So with a thicker acrylic, you get a much better thermal barrier between the inside water temperature and the outside of the acrylic. So with a half-inch tank, you get about 5 or 6 degrees variance, which is usually enough to put the tank right into the realm of room temperature on the outside and insulating the water on the inside. You get up into the 1-inch range and you get more like a 10 or 11 degree variance a lot of times. So the outside of the tank has a much better thermal barrier and insulation with thicker acrylic. So condensation, and it all kind of varies on where you live. I mean, if you live in, if you're in Louisiana and you have a glass tank, no matter what temperature you run it at, it's probably going to have condensation. But a lot of people, like we have people that keep cold water tanks in Arizona, but the benefit of living in Arizona is it's hot all the time, but everybody has air conditioning. So all their homes are, they're all climate controlled. So they're keeping their homes at, a steady temperature all the time. And if you have a steady temperature and low humidity in your home, then you know exactly what your dew point will be for condensation on your aquarium. And you can bump your temperatures up, like I run my inside tanks at about 57 or 58 degrees most of the time because sometimes during the summer, if it gets, in Oregon, if we get a weird summer storm or something and humidity jumps up to 50%, but it's 90 degrees outside, even with a half-inch tank, no matter what, you're going to get some condensation. But in yeah, for the most part, the biggest investment is that acrylic. I mean, it's the best thing you can get because it's going to save you money on your chilling first off, because if your tank stays more thermally insulated, your chiller's not going to run as much. So in turn, if you have a noisy chiller, or if you buy a nice one, get a nice new JBJ or something that runs super quiet, then you don't hear the chiller running that much either if you have a better insulated tank. So yeah, it's mostly just getting people past the using of glass tanks with them. But there's some people that do use glass tanks, but they probably have better. They keep slightly higher temperatures. I've heard of people even using like almost like a window tinting, a clear tinting on the outside of a glass tank, just to add that little layer of plastic, which is a little bit of a thermal barrier, but probably only a few degrees. But kind of a novel concept. I really like the idea.
Yeah. So in terms of thickness of the acrylic, what's kind of the accepted, lowest thickness that you can have and not deal with a ton of condensation problems? Again, knowing that it really depends on where you live as well.
Yeah, I would say half inch. Half inch has been my recommended lowest thickness of acrylic for the most part, because I've played around with like some of the off the shelf tanks. Like I bought an Aquarium 8-gallon tank from Petco, and that's like, it might be, I don't even know if it's 1/4 inch acrylic. It might be slightly thinner than that, but and that one, the problem I had was that my chiller basically just ran constantly trying to keep it down to temp, unless my house was sitting, if my house temperature was sitting about 65 degrees or whatever, and I had the chiller set to chill down to 55, then with the 10-degree variance, it's not too bad. But as soon as the temperatures got up into the 70s or the 80s in the house, the chiller was basically running all the time, and it just couldn't keep it down because there just wasn't enough insulation on the tank. So half inch has been the kind of baseline, but whenever possible, I recommend people go as thick as they can afford. It's you won't regret it. I mean, the nice thing about doing a thick acrylic tank also is you'll see them a lot of times. People who do frag tanks in the tropical industry, they'll do super thick acrylic on their frag tank so that they can have it completely open top and rimless. So frag tanks are readily available, usually in at least half-inch thickness, sometimes more. A lot of people doing 3/4 and 1 inch on those for the bigger ones so that they can have a big wide viewing space. So if anybody ever wanted to do like a tide pool cold water tank, a frag system would be perfect for it.
Yeah, that actually reminds me of one of your exhibits in your booth at MACNA last year, that tide pool, which was very cool. So let's go. What do you think the biggest myth is that people, kind of perpetuate across the internet about cold water systems? I mean, is the niche big enough to have a myth yet? But, I figure there's something out there.
Yeah, well, I think the initial myth was, whenever anybody mentioned, years back when people would mention, oh, I want to do a cold water tank, the first thing they go was, well, who are you going to buy from? Nobody sells cold water livestock. So that was the biggest first one to overcome, was letting people know that there's us now. We sell them, and then also keeping people's eyes open to the things that pop through in the tropical industry. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that comes in from Australia that's truly temperate. There's places like ORA. They're breeding, I think they breed three or four fish now that are temperate in origins. The white spotted pygmy filefish ranges all the way into northern Japan. The hula fish that they breed is from southern Australia. Even the Kamahare goby or blenny that they recently bred, that's ranges all over in northern Japan as well. So the livestock was the first biggest one, but then after that, I'd hear a lot of stuff like, oh, chillers are noisy, and they're going to use up too much energy, and it's going to cost me a fortune to run my chiller. And overcoming those myths was another. I kind of enjoyed disproving them, but it was I ran like my small temperate tank that I have is a 7.2 gallon out of half-inch acrylic, and it runs a 1/13 horsepower chiller. And I figured out the total consumed watts of energy that it uses by how many times it turns on during the day, and even included the wattage on the pumps and the LED lighting. So I think I use about a combined like 260 watts or something on the tank. So there's not very much. And when you add that all in to figure out how much it costs, I think it cost me about it was like $6 or something a month to run the tank. So I'm like, That's
So,
less than I spend on food.
right. So is it kind of a, can you look at it kind of from the standpoint of you're going to replace electricity costs for lighting with
Yeah.
electricity costs for a chiller?
Yeah, and that's a really good comparison because since there's not a lot of lighting demands, you don't need, metal halides was the biggest thing at first. Now with LEDs are already considerably better in power consumption, but you don't even need high output LEDs. So you can get away with, like the tank that I was just looking at today at the high school that I dropped livestock off to. They're using just a small eco exotic LED strip, maybe like I want to say it's like a 36-inch LED strip, and that's it.
Okay.
So, so a lot of it's really just lighting, depending on the viewing pleasure of the person who's looking at it. So, yeah, dimly lit tanks are okay in a lot of circumstances. Or like my home tank, I have two 50-watt LED spotlights because I like the look of the light focus to the rock pillars in the middle with dark to the edges, because it reminds me of when I dive out here and see rays of sunlight coming down through the kelp and stuff and looking down onto the rocks that way. So I tried to mimic that in my own tank. But yeah, the energy consumption is comparable, and then the initial cost, you figure if you're not buying a high end high output LED like a Kessel or something, and you're in turn putting that in that amount of money into your chiller with the same essential energy consumption, it basically evens out as being just as practical to keep. And then you can always save yourself money on chilling by having a better insulated tank. So spending the money on thicker acrylics is always good.
All right. Cool. So let's go. Let's talk about what your favorite cold water fish would be. I know it's probably going to be hard to pick one, but let's talk fish and then favorite invert.
Ooh, okay. It kind of, my favorite that I've personally kept kind of overlaps both. It was a juvenile giant Pacific octopus.
Ah.
That was one of the first ones I ever had caught, and it was the size of like a bottle cap when I caught it. It was itty bitty, and found that on like, it was a super low tide, full moon on like the night after Halloween on a weekend, and it was just crazy to find my first octopus in that setting. So kept him for about 9 months, and he grew from the size of a bottle cap to the mantle size of about a baseball with about a 13-inch tentacle span. And he ended up going to an aquarium in Florida.
Oh.
But yeah, he was great because it was super interactive, and my kids got to play with it and play peekaboo with it in and out of barnacle shells and stuff. But it was really neat to see a really young octopus get acclimated to being in captivity and being around people that early on. Because a lot of requests we get for livestock are for, public aquariums want big octopus to show off, and they just, big octopus don't ship well. They don't acclimate well to being kept, and so I always like dealing with smaller animals in that regard because they acclimate much better. But as far as, I guess that really falls under invert, but it was really my favorite. But the as far as fish, I'd say my personal favorite is the grunt sculpin, which is it's just an oddity of a fish in general. It looks like this, I don't know, like weird little pig fish kind of. It has like a snout on it, and it hops along the bottom. It mimics a barnacle in the wild. It tends to hide inside of empty barnacle shells, and its face curves upward like a closed barnacle mouth. And then its tail, it'll turn itself around and it'll stick its tail out, and its tail actually, it'll curve it so it looks like the fan of a barnacle. So it's just the mimicry that I love about those guys, and they're darn near impossible for us to find. So between those and maybe the Pacific spiny lumpsucker, which we've gotten a few different smaller lumpfish from Japan. We brought those in a couple years ago, and most recently we've been getting some of the Atlantic lumpfish, the Cyclopterus lumpus, and they get pretty hefty. But we've been getting those from the East Coast, and they're super cool. There's videos of those guys on YouTube of from the New England Aquarium where they've trained them to respond to food, to go through hoops and to roll over and climb up, and literally like swim up into their hands so they can do scale scrapes on them. So they're really neat fish, and they use them as a parasite cleaner in the Atlantic salmon aquaculture, I guess, in over in Europe, mostly Norway, Sweden, and they also harvest them for their eggs. They eat the caviar from them.
Interesting.
But yeah, kind of a cool fish.
I think that's kind of the appeal that somebody like I've been in the tropical side of the hobby for a long time now, but it's like a whole different world that you have over there because I'm not really familiar with any of the cold water species aside from what I've seen you guys do,
Yeah, yeah.
and it's just there's always something really neat that you've just never seen before. So I'm sure that's probably the appeal for a lot of folks that transition over. So
Yeah, that was a lot of the appeal for me too. I mean, just every time I'd go out collecting, even on our last dive out, we were diving an area that, uh, I mean, I've probably dove that area, 100 times in the past like 4 years, and it seems like every time we go out there, we find something new. Like most recently, I found a solitary stony cup coral called an oval cup coral, which is really cool to find. Also found Spanish shawls, just this crazy bright colored nudibranch that normally are associated more towards Northern California and South.
hmm,
And they're occasionally seen in Vancouver, British Columbia. But that's the beautiful thing about the Oregon coast here is that the coast itself is so rugged that there's not very many people that explore it or dive it. And there's very few people that explore that inner lap where like we'll go out and we'll free dive and snorkel like in the surf just off the edge of tide pools where, I mean, that's if you were to go out there and scuba dive, it would be just crashing you around. But when you're floating at the surface and then you dive down when you want, it's pretty cool.
hmm, interesting.
Yeah,
All right.
lots of new.
Yeah, definitely. So let's go ahead and change gears and talk about your business, Coldwater Marine
Yeah.
Aquatics, aptly named, of course. So tell us a little bit about the business and how you got it started.
Yeah, it kind of all came from gosh, way back. I mean, going all the way back from when I was in high school. I tried doing temperate marine tanks and talked to the dealers at Marine Land because I worked at a pet store down in Eugene when I was going to school and talked to the Marine Land reps and they're like, oh yeah, we build these awesome lobster tanks and the price point on them was just way too much. They wanted like $10 or $12,000 for a brand new lobster tank back in
Wow.
2005. It was
Yeah.
just mind blowing. So I kind of I tried to build a glass tank with a mini fridge chiller on it back then, and it kind of worked. And long enough for me to watch the animals for like a couple weeks before they all started to wither away, and I felt really bad about even trying to do it that way. Um, so kind of put it all on the back burner until I moved out to where I live now with my wife and kids, and um, I happened to find a used lobster tank on Craigslist for like $200, and it was brand new. Basically, came out of an Albertsons, a commercial recycler had bought everything up when they redid everything in a local Albertsons. So I bought that and filled it up and started going taking collection trips by myself to just get animals because I wanted to keep them. And down the road, I picked up a couple more lobster tanks, refurbished them, and flipped them, sold them on Craigslist and stuff, and sold one to a local fish store who the guy who ended up buying it from them turns out to be Josh Groves, my now business
Uh,
partner. And I'd left my number with in the tank, literally said want to tide pool and put my name and number on there and dropped it in the tank. So he gave me a call and we went out collecting and we were setting up his tank and he just kind of spurred the idea of like, have you ever thought about offering this stuff up for sale? Do you think anybody else would want to do this? And I was like, well, I don't know. There's a lot of permitting and there's a lot of paperwork. And, I mean, who else besides us wants to do this? And kind of, but I looked into it and it took us about a year to get permitted and working with Department of Fish and Wildlife here in Oregon. And yeah, from there, we just kind of took it on as, well, we're going to be out collecting for ourselves anyways. So maybe we can sell a few anemones here and there and pay for our gas to go to the coast and back. And um, from there, it was, yeah, we just started talking to people who are interested in keeping cold water tanks. We talked, public aquariums hit us up right away. Universities and biological research places, science centers, they all started getting in contact with us because they needed West Coast tide pool invertebrates and fish and all sorts of stuff. And from there, we decided to start looking around the world for different animals that live in temperate waters. So we started doing imports from southern Australia and from Europe, from Japan. Hopefully, we're hoping to find somebody in Chile that we can hook up with because there's some pretty amazing anemones down there in the Chilean fjords in southern Chile that we really want to get, but the haven't found them yet. So, but
Maybe
yeah,
they're out there listening to this right now.
yes, yes.
Awesome. So you said you sell a lot to the public aquariums and in schools and stuff like that. Would you say that's the majority of your business, or would it be hobbyists? Or do hobbyists kind of just supplement the business?
It's kind of, as far as from a monetary value, the public aquariums always put big orders in and they want a whole bunch of stuff. So from a dollar perspective, they're definitely doing more business with us. From a sheer numbers perspective, the hobbyists blow them away. I mean, just yesterday I shipped 4 boxes of livestock just to people in California that were all hobbyists. And then I sent one off to Massachusetts, and then this morning I sent one off to Minnesota. So those are all different people keeping cold water tanks. That was just this week because of the European livestock. So,
Right. So you mentioned going out and collecting as well as importing. How often are you out collecting, and do you just stay in your local area, or do you travel a bit to collect? I mean, how does that break down?
we kind of go. Well, as funny as it sounds, we go where the tide lets us. Ah, totally just dropped my phone.
You dropped us.
Uh-oh. Let's see. Where is my video at?
There he is. He's back. All right.
All right. Sorry. Yeah. So
I'm not going to edit that out. I'm leaving it.
Oh no. Okay. That was a low tide, by the way. That's what caused that.
Oh, that okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
So
Makes sense.
totally right. It was
Yep.
no, but we honestly, yeah, we look at the tide tables. We see where part of our permitting is. We integrated this into the permits because we were some of the first people to get the permits for Oregon. Is that we don't collect in the same place consecutively. So we try to, if we go to one place in Oregon and we harvest green anemones, we don't go and harvest from there the next time out. We spread it out to another location and look for different things there. But we like to, hit the big minus tides, dive during the high slack tides. And yeah, I mean, in where we're based out of, just outside of Portland, we're about an hour and a half, as the bird flies to the coast. So we just drive there and back maybe 4 or 5 times a month.
Okay.
Depends on what the demand is, or we try and go out every time there's a minus tide. We go out just to look for stuff, but if we get specific orders for things that we know where to collect them, we'll go out and just get those, kind of on demand.
Okay. So you mentioned Oregon, working with them for permits. Was there something already set up for licensing and permitting, or did they kind of have to design something for you guys since this is a new thing?
Yeah, they didn't have anything specifically for what we were trying to do, and a lot of the initial calls that I made to people at Department of Wildlife was, hi, I want to find out how to sell an anemone that I collect from the Oregon coast, and they said, there's no way to do that. You can't do it. Okay, bye. So that was the majority of it, and then I dug through all the division rules and regulations and kind of found what works for us. Applied for the permitting and talked to the right guys that handle intertidal collection, which is the majority of what we do, and talked to them, and they basically were like, well, we can make it happen. Just supply us with a list of all the species that you intend to collect and the locations in which you intend to collect them. And normally I think they use that as a deterrent because a lot of people are like, oh, that's what, so they only limit. But I had the list ready, so I just handed it to them. So a little preparation for me, but from there it took a while, just back and forth. We had several meetings with them where we met in person and just kind of discussed what the idea behind doing it was. They were mostly concerned with environmental impact. So we kind of integrated a lot of those things. All our collection methods are by hand. So, and just as an example, the total number of animals that we harvested last year was like, we have to report them by pounds. So we did like just over 1,000 pounds of animals, which when you figure that like a large green anemone is probably a pound by itself, you can kind of see we're not taking a whole lot of animals comparatively to like some of the commercial fisheries, or like, there was like, 60,000 pounds of spiny dogfish harvested last year, which is just a darn near unedible shark. So you go figure.
So did they put take limits for you guys? I guess I'm trying to kind of draw parallels. Down in Florida, you know, personally allowed to collect for yourself. There are take limits and size restrictions and stuff like that. Did
Yeah.
they put anything like that in place for you guys?
There's actually those are the regulations that I followed when I was collecting for myself before we
Okay.
did it commercially. They have those all in place through the marine sport fishing guides. So you could, if you lived in Oregon or you were visiting, you could pick up a shellfish license and a fishing license, and as long as you're following the regulations for the size restrictions of the animals that you're collecting, like you couldn't go out and take a 2-inch salmon from the ocean or something. It would you got to follow size restrictions and collection limits. So for a lot of the things that most people are interested in, anemones, sea stars, sea urchins, cucumbers, hermit crabs, snails, like the stuff that you'd put into an aquarium as far as invertebrates, those are all covered under they call them unclassified invertebrates. So
Okay.
with the correct shellfish license in Oregon, as long as you're not harvesting in a marine protected area or in a restricted zone or anything, you can take 10 of those per person per day. So, and those are that's what I started collecting with. Me and my oldest son would go out and we'd both have our shellfish licenses, and I'd tell him, hey, go get 10 hermit crabs, and he'd grab those, and I'd go and look for anemones and stuff. So it's it's a lot of fun. So that's what I always tell people that live in Oregon. We don't sell a lot of livestock to people in Oregon. We just kind of tell them, hey, come out and hang out with us, and we'll show you where you can get it yourself.
All right. So, do you operate under those same take limits and size restrictions as the recreational collectors?
The recreational theirs is actually a little bit more restricted, I guess, for daily collection. Ours is restricted by zones. So, like we only have a certain area in which that we can collect in. It's set by this GPS point to this GPS point. And we can only collect the animals that are on our list that we submitted to them. So there's some things that don't allow commercial collection up here, so we can't touch those. And then we've kind of set our own limitations as far as like certain animals that are easily captive propagate, like an aggregated anemone is a real common anemone out here. I mean, there's literally billions of them on the coastline, but we don't collect them that often because we can harvest 4 or 5 of them, bring them back to our facility, put them in a tank, and they'll divide by themselves. They just divide through laceration. They just tear themselves into 2 new anemones. So we let those guys do it. But as far as like, they didn't give us a specific like poundage or numbers. They just kind of said, well, let's see what you guys are doing for the first couple years. If we came out and collected, 1 million pounds of anemones in the first year, they probably would have just said, all right, that's enough. No. So we're taking it pretty moderately and from a conservation standpoint, just to make sure that it's something that we can continue to do, even as crazy as we harvested some or collected some native fluffy sculpins out here, and they laid eggs. So I was like, well, let's hatch out the eggs and have captive bred fluffy sculpins. Like, why not?
Right.
I mean, why not start it from the right perspective of captive breed as many fish as you can from the get-go, so that you never run into problems with like the Hawaii restrictions or closures of different areas. It's keep it moderate. So trying to do it that way.
Awesome. So what's next for Coldwater Marine Aquatics? Aside from more collecting.
Well, it's a funny term that came up was the Coldwater takeover is what people were calling it for a while. But I would say, I kind of like the idea of. It's always great to have more people doing it. Better business for us, but from a business personal perspective, I really want to push bringing in stuff from around the world that nobody's really looking at. Like with our Australian imports, we have a who gets weedy sea dragons. So he collects those, the adult males that are buried out, and hatches them out and then rears the young up, and then he can sell those. So we're importing some of those here soon. And that's just like unheard of outside of public aquariums. So trying to find places like that, like, exploring Chile. That would be really cool to find South American temperate stuff, South Africa, like has temperate seas. Mm-hmm. All over the place. There's northern Japan and, all of the northern coast of Russia. There's tons of places that I just love to get in contact with people and start importing it or go there myself and explore it and find out how to do it. But I'd say yeah, just expanding on people being able to keep a different side of marine aquariums. It's always cool because you see a lot of reef keepers will have their designated reef tank, and then sometimes they'll have a fish only tank, or they'll have a non-photosynthetic system, or they'll have only stony coral or only soft coral, or they'll have just a freshwater tropical, or they'll have a brackish water tank. We just wanted to kind of make it available for people to have another option of a style of biotope and marine aquariums to keep. So,
right. Just to be included in the discussion, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Awesome. So I guess the last thing I want to end on is if someone out there is listening to this and they're interested in getting into the cold water world, where should they start? What are good resources? Of course, your website, but where else can they go?
Yeah, I mean, other than our website, coldwatermarineaquatics.com, there's I linked a lot of stuff on there, old articles that have been on there. I wrote an article for Reef Hobbyist magazine not too long ago, which was actually it was in their quarter 1 printing, so that went out to a lot of wholesalers, and it's in there. It has kind of the basics of what you'd expect in setting up a temperate aquarium. A lot of my trial and error kind of information is in there, so that's available as a digital PDF from Reef Hobbyist. There's also like our Facebook group is a great one because you get personal accounts of people keeping their tanks and what works and what doesn't, and what kind of filtration they're using or experimental stuff. So it's always nice to get firsthand accounts and interact with people. And that's if you're on Facebook, you can look up Coldwater Marine Aquarium Owners. And that's a good. It's a great little community we got going. People are really exchanging a lot of information there. Outside of that, there's some classic articles out there that have really good information. Bob Fenner on Wet Web Media, he wrote several articles about keeping cold water aquariums. Steve Weist's website, OregonReef.com, has a good section about his cold water aquariums. Also, Kenneth Wingerter, a guy I used to work with down in Eugene at the pet store, he writes a lot of stuff. He's written for Advanced Aquarist. He wrote an article for us that was published in Coral Magazine, which I think is still available online. He's wrote a whole bunch of temperate marine aquarium articles through Advanced Aquarist. But other than that, I mean, I'd say get in contact with somebody who's keeping a temperate tank. I mean, either ask on your local fish forum, is anybody keeping cold water? And I'm sure people will chime in right away because they're dying to talk about it if they are.
Right.
Or they'll redirect you to a lot of the same places that I found, or maybe better resources as well. I mean, I found temperate keepers on Shark and Ray Central, of all places, because they're keeping cold water sharks. So it's and they don't even overlap into the temperate reef area, because they're just thinking, I'm going to keep my temperate water shark, solitary, and I'm going to keep it at a cooler temperature because I have to for this animal. But they don't ever kind of mesh into the idea of, well, there's more out there that you can keep also with them. You could keep echinoderms, starfish, different things easily with a shark like that. So but yeah, lots of resources out there.
Great. That's awesome. Well, I mean, that's pretty much everything I have for you today. The only last thing I want to say is go Bucks with a B. You've been taunting me with that shirt on this whole time, so I have to get one in. So.
No, you know what? You guys were the better team and you deserved it. You played far superior, and you proved that stomping down on Alabama on the way there. So I give you guys full props for that win.
All right, fair enough. All right, well, it's been awesome talking to you, Stu. Thanks a lot.
Likewise, Chris. All right, take care.
All right, bye.
Bye.
So there you have it. Cold water and temperate marine aquariums, a pretty cool niche inside the saltwater aquarium hobby. So what do you think? Are you interested in keeping one yourself? Tell us in the comments below. Also, if you keep one currently, tell us about that as well. In the description, I'll put some links to the Coldwater Marine Aquatics website, as well as other informational links that you might want to check out if you're interested in learning more. That's it for now. I have been Caribbean Chris Aldrich. This has been Salt Speak, and we'll see you next time.